Look at them, Kextar. Just look at them. The Zephyrian commander's 4 eyes rolled in what could generously be called exasperation, though on a face that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and someone's fever dream, it was hard to tell. His mandibles clicked in what his species considered the equivalent of a deep sigh, which, for the record, sounded like someone crushing bubble wrap in a library. "I see them, Velthok," Kextar replied, his own mandibles twitching. "They are remarkably unremarkable." They were observing the human settlement on Kepler 442b from their cloaked observation deck, watching the daily routine of the Earth colony that had been established 6 months ago. To the Zephyrians, who had conquered 17 star systems through a combination of superior technology and what they like to call aggressive negotiations, which was really just a fancy way of saying, we showed up with bigger guns, the humans were a fascinating study in cosmic irony. "No natural armor," Velthok continued, gesturing with one of his 6 arms toward the viewport. "No claws, no venomous stingers, no acidic spit. They don't even have proper exoskeletons. They're just soft." And he wasn't wrong. The humans below were going about their business in their soft, pinkish skin, completely unaware they were being watched by 2 aliens who could probably bench press a small spacecraft. The Zephyrians stood 8 feet tall, had chitinous armor that could deflect small arms fire, and possessed the kind of strength that made hydraulic presses weep with envy. "Their military records are adequate," Kextar admitted, pulling up a holographic display that showed various human conflicts. "But look at this. They fight each other over the most trivial things. Resources, ideology, who gets to draw lines on maps. No coordination, no hive mind, no real unity." Velthok's eyes, all 4 of them, lit up with what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. Soft in body, soft in mind. When the hegemony decides to expand into this sector, they'll surrender within a rotation. Mark my words. Oh, if only they knew what they were dealing with. See, the thing about humans, and this is something that approximately 99.7% of alien species failed to grasp until it was far too late, is that being soft on the outside doesn't mean jack squat about what's on the inside. Humans are basically walking contradictions wrapped in easily bruised skin. They're simultaneously the most cooperative and most stubbornly individual species in the galaxy. They'll help a stranger change a tire, and then cut you off in traffic 10 minutes later. They're capable of extraordinary compassion and absolutely breathtaking violence, sometimes within the same conversation. But more than that, humans have this delightful little quirk that most aliens discover only when it's too late to do anything about it. They're really, really good at making things that cut, stab, slice, dice, and generally ruin someone's day. Down in the colony, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Blade Hawthorne was having what she would later describe as a perfectly reasonable Tuesday morning, which for someone with her background meant she'd already disassembled and reassembled her sidearm twice, checked the perimeter sensors, and was now sitting in the armory doing what she loved most, knife maintenance. Now Blade, and yes, that was actually her call sign from her military days, not some ironic nickname, had a relationship with edged weapons that could only be described as intimate. She'd grown up in rural Montana where her grandmother had taught her that a sharp knife was more useful than a dull wit, and considerably more reliable than most people. She'd carried that philosophy through 2 tours as a Navy SEAL, a stint in private security, and now as the head of colonial defense for Kepler 442b. The collection spread across her workbench would have made a medieval armorer weep with joy. There was her combat knife, a wicked 7-inch blade that had seen more action than a Hollywood stuntman. Her butterfly knife, because sometimes you need to intimidate someone and show off your manual dexterity at the same time. A set of throwing knives that were balanced to perfection. Several utility knives of various sizes and purposes. And her pride and joy, a katana that her grandfather had acquired during World War II, through what he'd always diplomatically called a change in ownership status. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" she said to herself, running a whetstone along the edge of her combat knife with the kind of practiced rhythm that spoke of years of repetition. The blade sang, literally sang, as metal met stone, producing a whisper-thin harmony that would have made a composer jealous. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the soft thump of something landing outside the armory. Almost. Blade's hand froze mid-stroke. In her experience, things that went thump in the night, or morning for that matter, generally fell into two categories. Things that were supposed to go thump, and things that were definitely not supposed to go thump. And since the colony's supply drops weren't scheduled for another week, this fell squarely into the second category. She set down her whetstone and picked up her sidearm, but her hand also, almost unconsciously, slipped the freshly sharpened combat knife into its sheath. Because you know what they say. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and when you're Blade Hawthorne, everything looks like it might need cutting. The door to the armory was reinforced polymer, which meant it could stop most small arms fire, but was also completely transparent. Through it, she could see two figures that were definitely not human, unless humans had recently evolved extra arms and a serious case of the uglies. Well, she muttered. This is either first contact or an invasion. Either way, Tuesday just got a lot more interesting. Outside, Velthok and Kextar were having what could charitably be called a strategic disagreement about their current course of action. I still say we should have brought the restraint fields, Kextar was saying, his mandibles clicking nervously. The hegemony protocols clearly state. The protocols are for species that might actually pose a threat, Velthok interrupted. Look at this place. Their defensive perimeter consists of sensors and warning systems. No energy barriers, no automated turrets, no orbital defense platforms. They're practically inviting conquest. They had materialized, quite literally thanks to their personal teleportation devices, right outside what their scans indicated was the colony's weapons storage facility. The plan was simple. Secure the humans' weapons, demonstrate superior technology, demand surrender. It was a tried-and-true formula that had worked on the Rigelians, the Centaurans, and that unfortunate species on Tau Ceti whose name was unpronounceable and whose resistance had lasted exactly 4 minutes. Besides, Velthok continued, what are they going to do? Throw their soft, fleshy appendages at us? Oh, sweet summer child, if only you knew. The door to the armory slid open with a soft hiss, and both aliens turned to see a human female emerge. She was, by Zephyrian standards, laughably small. Barely 6 feet tall, with arms that looked like they couldn't hurt a fly. She had shoulder-length brown hair that caught the morning sunlight, and she was wearing what appeared to be standard colonial work clothes. Cargo pants, boots, and a tank top that revealed arms that were lean but surprisingly well-defined. What she was not wearing was a look of fear, surprise, or confusion. Instead, she had the expression of someone who was mildly annoyed at being interrupted during personal time. "Morning, gentlemen," Blade said, her voice carrying the kind of casual confidence that should have been a warning sign. "Beautiful day for an invasion, isn't it?" Velthok's mandibles spread in what his species considered a threatening display. "Human female, you will—" "Nope," Blade interrupted, holding up one finger. "Let me stop you right there. First of all, it's Lieutenant Commander or ma'am, not human female. I worked hard for that rank, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some overgrown cricket ignore proper military courtesy." Both aliens blinked, which, with 4 eyes each, was quite the production. "Second," she continued, "I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that you boys are here for one of 3 reasons. You want to study us, you want to enslave us, or you want to conquer us, and frankly, I'm not really in the mood for any of those options today." Kextar, who was starting to get the feeling that this wasn't going according to plan, decided to assert some authority. "We are of the Zephyrian hegemony. Your species has been evaluated and found wanting. Surrender now, and your integration into our empire will be swift." Blade looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Velthok. "Is he serious?" "Deadly serious," Velthok replied, puffing out his chest plates. "We have conquered 17 systems. Your primitive weapons are no match for our technology." "Primitive weapons, huh?" Blade's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if you were feeling generous, or the prelude to violence if you were feeling realistic. "You know, that's interesting. Because here's the thing about humans. We've been perfecting the art of violence since we figured out how to pick up rocks. And while rocks are great and all, we've evolved. She took a step forward, and both aliens instinctively took a step back. Which was odd, because they were supposedly the superior species here. You see, boys, the thing about being Zoft is that it made us creative. When you're not born with claws and armor and acid spit, you have to make your advantages. And humans? We're really, really good at making things that give us advantages. Her hand moved to her hip, and faster than either alien could track, the combat knife was in her hand. Not drawn threateningly, just there. Like it had always been there, like it was an extension of her arm. This, she said conversationally, is 7 inches of high-carbon steel. It can punch through Kevlar, slice through rope, and generally make life very unpleasant for anything that annoys me. But it's not the knife that should worry you. Velthok's eyes tracked the blade, but he forced himself to laugh. A primitive cutting implement. Our chitinous armor can— Oh, I'm not talking about using it on you, Blade interrupted. Well, not directly anyway. See, the thing is, this knife is just a tool. The real weapon is the 40 years of training, experience, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness behind it. She shifted her grip on the knife, and suddenly it wasn't just a tool anymore. It was an extension of her will, perfectly balanced, perfectly positioned. The way she held it spoke of muscle memory developed over decades, of thousands of hours of practice, of a relationship with violence that was both professional and deeply personal. Your scans probably told you that humans don't have natural weapons, she continued, beginning to move. Not threatening, just moving. Like a predator circling prey, except she wasn't circling. She was flowing, each step perfectly balanced, each movement economical and purposeful. What they probably didn't tell you is that we turned ourselves into weapons. Kekstar was beginning to understand why this felt wrong. The humans' movement patterns were unlike anything in their database. Most species, when confronted by superior force, either submitted or postured aggressively. They didn't dance. Because that's what she was doing, really. She was dancing, and the dance was about death. I mean, look at this knife, she said, holding it up so the light caught the edge. Humans have been making things like this for about 10,000 years. We started with flint and obsidian, moved on to bronze, then iron, then steel. We've had a lot of practice. She moved again, and suddenly she was closer. Neither alien had seen her take a step, but she was definitely closer. But you know what's really interesting? It's not the knife you should be worried about. It's the fact that I have 47 other knives in that armory behind me, and I know how to use every single one of them in ways that would make your chitin crawl. Velthok decided it was time to assert dominance. He reached for his weapon, a sophisticated energy projector that could stun, paralyze, or kill, depending on the setting. It was top-of-the-line Zephyrian technology, crafted from materials that didn't exist on most planets, and powered by a fusion cell that could run for centuries. He never even got it clear of its holster. Blade moved like liquid lightning, and suddenly Velthok was on the ground with a throwing knife buried in his weapon hand, and another one pinning his primary arm to the earth. The movement had been so fast, so fluid, that Kekstar's brain couldn't process what had happened. 1 second the human was talking, the next his commander was down and screaming. Now that, Blade said conversationally, was rude. I was having a conversation. She had 2 more throwing knives in her hands, and Kekstar realized with growing horror that he hadn't seen her draw them. They were just there, like she'd conjured them from thin air. The thing about knives, she continued, as if she hadn't just casually disabled a warrior from a species that considered itself the apex of evolution, is that they're personal. When you shoot someone, there's distance. It's almost clinical. But a knife requires commitment. It requires you to get close, to look your opponent in the eye, to be absolutely certain about what you're doing. Kekstar tried to back away, but his legs weren't cooperating. Something about the way she moved, the casual confidence, the complete lack of fear. It was triggering every predator avoidance instinct his species had evolved over millions of years. I learned to throw when I was 8, Blade said, hefting one of the knives. My grandmother started me on hay bales in the backyard. By the time I was 12, I could hit a playing card at 30 feet. By the time I graduated high school, I could put 6 knives in a 6-inch circle at 50 feet. And by the time I finished my second tour, I could kill a man with a thrown blade from 100 yards away in a crosswind. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made small children hide behind their mothers and made grown men reconsider their life choices. But you know what the really fun part is? I don't even need to throw them to ruin your day. Suddenly she was moving again, and this time Kextar could see the pattern. She wasn't just fast, she was efficient. Every movement served a purpose, every step was calculated, every gesture was part of a larger design that culminated in very bad things happening to anyone who wasn't her. The butterfly knife appeared in her left hand, the blade snapping open with a series of movements that were too fast to follow. In her right hand, the combat knife spun once, twice, settling into a reverse grip that spoke of intimate familiarity with close-quarters combat. "See, the thing about humans," she said, advancing on Kextar with the inexorable patience of gravity, "is that we're persistence hunters. That's our evolutionary niche. We don't have to be the fastest or the strongest or the best armored. We just have to be stubborn enough to keep coming until everything else gives up." Kextar tried to activate his personal shield generator, but his hands were shaking too badly to work the controls. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be soft. They were supposed to surrender when faced with superior technology and overwhelming force. They weren't supposed to be whatever this was. "And the beautiful thing about knives," Blade continued, "is that they don't care about your armor, your shields, or your advanced technology. Physics is physics, and 7 inches of sharpened steel will find a way through just about anything if you know where to apply it." She was close enough now that Kextar could see his reflection in the polished blade of her combat knife. He could see something else, too. His own death, written in the casual competence of her movements and the absolute certainty in her eyes. "Now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You boys have a choice. You can get back on whatever brought you here. Fly back to your hegemony and tell them that humans are a lot more interesting than they thought. Or ... She let the sentence hang in the air like a blade hanging over a neck. "Or?" Kextar managed to croak. "Or I show you exactly how creative humans can get when someone threatens their homes." The butterfly knife spun in her left hand, a blur of steel and precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The combat knife in her right hand never wavered, its point tracking Kextar's center of mass with mechanical precision. "What's it going to be, boys?" Velthok, still pinned to the ground by 2 throwing knives, managed to activate his emergency beacon. "Retreat," he gasped. "Signal the fleet. Full retreat." "Smart choice," Blade said, taking a step back. "And here's a free piece of advice for your hegemony. Next time you want to evaluate a species, maybe don't start with the assumption that soft equals weak. Because humans, we've been turning our softness into strength for about 300,000 years, and we've gotten really good at it." The air shimmered, and both aliens vanished in a flash of blue light, leaving behind only 2 throwing knives embedded in the ground, and a story that would become legend in the Zephyrian fleet. Blade walked over and pulled her knives from the earth, wiping them clean before sliding them back into their sheaths. She looked up at the sky, where she was pretty sure an alien ship was probably having a very intense discussion about whether humanity was worth the trouble. "Friday's going to love this," she muttered, referring to the colony's AI. "First contact, and I didn't even get to show them the really scary stuff." She headed back toward the armory, then paused and called out to the sky. "And hey, if any of your friends are listening, remember what I said about knives being personal? That goes double for anyone who thinks they can just drop by and threaten my people." The response came 6 hours later, in the form of a formal communication from the Zephyrian hegemony. It was broadcast on all frequencies, translated into every human language, and marked with the highest priority designation in their diplomatic protocols. "To the human species. Upon further consideration, The Zephyrian hegemony has determined that your species possesses unique qualities that make integration into our empire inadvisable. We hereby formally recognize human sovereignty and request establishment of non-aggression protocols. We also wish to express our sincere appreciation for the educational demonstration provided by your representative, and our hope that future interactions will be conducted through appropriate diplomatic channels, rather than personal combat instruction. The message was signed by the High Command of the Zephyrian Fleet, and included a footnote that read, "Please note that hegemony exploration vessels have been instructed to maintain a minimum distance of 5 light-years from all human colonies pending establishment of formal diplomatic relations." When the message was played at the weekly colony meeting, Blade sat in the back and tried very hard not to smirk. She mostly succeeded. "So," asked Director Walsh, the colony administrator, "should we be worried about reprisals?" Blade shook her head. "I don't think so. See, there are 2 kinds of bullies in the universe. The kind that pick on people weaker than them, and the kind that are looking for a real fight. The Zephyrians are definitely the first kind." "How can you tell?" "Easy," Blade replied. "The second kind would have come back with more friends and bigger guns. The first kind sends a formal apology and backs away slowly while making placating gestures." She wasn't wrong. Over the following weeks, reports came in from other human colonies throughout the sector. Zephyrian ships were maintaining their distance, conducting what appeared to be very careful and respectful scans, and absolutely refusing to make direct contact. Word spread through the galactic community, as word has a tendency to do when it involves someone getting their comeuppance in spectacular fashion. The humans, it seemed, were not quite what they appeared to be. Yes, they were soft and squishy and seemingly fragile, but they were also creative, stubborn, and possessed of a relationship with violence that was both sophisticated and deeply personal. More importantly, they had knives. Lots and lots of knives, and apparently they knew how to use them. The Rigelian Empire, which had been considering humanity as a potential target for expansion, quietly removed human space from their star charts and focused their attention on easier prey. The Centauran Federation sent a formal request for cultural exchange, specifically requesting information about human blade customs for academic purposes. And the Tau Ceti Collective issued a statement declaring humanity to be a species of significant interest, and establishing a standing order that all contact with human vessels be conducted with appropriate caution and respect. But perhaps the most telling response came from the Andromedans, who were widely considered to be the most civilized and diplomatically sophisticated species in the local galactic cluster. Their message was brief, formal, and carried a tone of deep respect. To the human colonial authority. The Andromedan Council has reviewed the recent interaction between your species and the Zephyrian hegemony. We wish to formally commend your representative's demonstration of diplomatic restraint and educational outreach. We would be honored to open formal diplomatic relations at your earliest convenience. Please note that our initial delegation will be unarmed and will approach through established diplomatic channels. The footnote to that message read, "We have also taken the liberty of forwarding your representative's contact information to the Galactic Academy of Martial Sciences, as they have expressed significant interest in scheduling a lecture series on applied human combat philosophy." 3 months later, Blade found herself standing in front of a mixed audience of alien diplomats, military officers, and academics, holding a simple combat knife and trying to explain humanity to beings who had spent their entire lives thinking they understood the universe. "The first thing you need to understand about humans," she began, "is that we're not actually that different from anyone else. We want security, prosperity, and the chance to raise our kids in peace. But the second thing you need to understand is that we've learned that sometimes, if you want peace, you have to be really, really good at war." She held up the knife, letting the light catch the edge. "This is just a tool, a piece of shaped metal with an edge and a point. By itself, it's not particularly threatening. But in the hands of someone who knows how to use it, who has trained with it, who understands both its capabilities and its limitations, it becomes something more." She began to move, demonstrating the basic forms and exercises that had been drilled into her over decades of training. The audience watched in fascination as the simple blade became an extension of her will, a seamless part of her movement and intent. Humans have been making and using tools like this for 10,000 years, she continued. We've refined the metallurgy, perfected the design, and developed training methodologies that can turn an average person into someone capable of defending themselves and others. But more than that, we've developed a philosophy around it. She stopped moving and faced the audience directly. The knife teaches patience, because you only get one chance to get it right. It teaches precision, because a millimeter can be the difference between success and failure. It teaches commitment, because once you've decided to act, there's no taking it back. And most importantly, it teaches responsibility, because with the power to harm comes the obligation to protect. An Andromedan in the front row raised a tentacle. But surely, Lieutenant Commander, there are more civilized ways to resolve conflicts. Blade smiled. Absolutely. Diplomacy, negotiation, compromise, these are all excellent tools, and they should always be the first resort. But the thing about civilized solutions is that they only work when everyone involved agrees to be civilized. And unfortunately, the universe is full of beings who view civility as weakness and restraint as opportunity. She held up the knife again. This isn't about being aggressive or violent. It's about being prepared. It's about making sure that when someone shows up and tells you that you're soft, that you're weak, that you should surrender your freedom and dignity for the sake of their convenience, you have options. She slid the knife back into its sheath. Because here's the thing about knives, and about humans in general. We're really hoping we never have to use them. But if we do, we're going to be very, very good at it. The applause was polite but thoughtful, and Blade could see in the audience's faces that they were beginning to understand something important about humanity. They were beginning to understand that strength didn't always come in the obvious packages, that wisdom often wore the mask of simplicity, and that sometimes the most dangerous beings were the ones who looked like they couldn't hurt a fly. Later, at the reception, she was approached by a young Zephyrian who wore the insignia of a diplomatic attaché. "Lieutenant Commander," the alien said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "I wanted to personally apologize for my species' initial misunderstanding of human capabilities." Blade accepted a glass of something that was probably alcohol and definitely blue. No harm done. Well, except to Velthok's pride and Kextar's sleep schedule, but that was their choice. "I have to ask," the Zephyrian continued, "was it really necessary to be quite so dramatic in your demonstration?" Blade considered the question seriously. "You know, I've thought about that a lot. And here's the thing. Sometimes a demonstration is worth 1,000 words. Your commanders came to my colony expecting to find soft, weak beings who would surrender at the first sign of superior force. They needed to understand that their assumptions were wrong, and they needed to understand it in a way that would stick." She took a sip of the blue liquid and immediately regretted it. It tasted like antiseptic and disappointment. If I'd just talked to them, explained that humans were more capable than they appeared, they might have listened politely and then proceeded with their original plan. But by showing them what human capabilities actually looked like, by making it personal and immediate and undeniable, I made sure the lesson would stick. The Zephyrian nodded slowly. "And the knives? Was that symbolism, or?" Blade grinned. "Oh, the knives are real. Every human colony has someone like me, and every someone like me has been training with edged weapons since they were old enough to hold them safely. It's not symbolism, it's just practical preparation." "For what?" "For Tuesday mornings when aliens show up and try to tell us we're soft." The Zephyrian's mandibles clicked in what she was learning to recognize as laughter. "I think I understand now. The knives aren't really the point, are they?" "Now you're getting it," Blade replied. "The knives are just the visible part. The real point is that humans don't give up. We don't surrender. We don't accept that soft means weak, or that peaceful means helpless. And when someone needs to learn that lesson, we're happy to provide hands-on instruction." As the evening wore on, Blade found herself in conversation after conversation with beings who were trying to understand how they had so completely misjudged humanity. The consensus seemed to be that most species evaluated others based on physical capabilities and visible technology, without considering the intangible factors that made humans so uniquely dangerous: creativity, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "You know what the really funny part is?" she told a group of Andromedan military officers late in the evening. "The Zephyrians were actually right about us being soft. We are soft compared to most species. We bruise easily, we don't have natural armor, we can't breathe poison or see in the dark or any of those useful things." "Then how?" one of them asked. "Because being soft taught us to be smart. When you can't win through brute force, you learn to win through preparation, strategy, and sheer bloody-minded determination. When you can't rely on natural weapons, you learn to make better artificial ones. When you can't intimidate your enemies with size and strength, you learn to intimidate them with competence and the absolute certainty that you will not quit." She pulled out her combat knife one more time, holding it so the light caught the edge. This knife represents about 10,000 years of human innovation, refinement, and dedication to the principle that if someone threatens what we care about, we will stop them. It's not the most advanced weapon in the galaxy, but it's reliable, it's effective, and it's backed by the kind of training and mindset that turns tools into extensions of will. She slid the knife back into its sheath. That's what the Zephyrians didn't understand. They saw the knife as just a primitive cutting implement. They didn't see the 40 years of training behind it, or the 300,000 years of human evolution that created the mind that wields it. They definitely didn't see the absolute, unshakable conviction that anyone who threatens human freedom is going to have a really, really bad day. The Andromedan officers exchanged glances, and Blade could practically see them mentally updating their species' threat assessment files. "So," one of them finally asked, "what would you recommend for species that want to establish good relations with humanity?" Blade smiled. "Easy. Treat us with respect, approach us as equals, and remember that soft doesn't mean weak. It just means we had to get creative about being strong." She finished her terrible blue drink and set down the glass. "And maybe don't show up unannounced talking about conquest and integration. We're friendly people, but we have trust issues and an unfortunate tendency to assume that anyone who opens a conversation with threats is probably not interested in a productive dialogue." As the reception wound down and delegates began making their farewells, the young Zephyrian attaché approached her one more time. "Lieutenant Commander, I have one final question, if you don't mind." "Shoot." "When you told my commanders that the knife wasn't the thing they should be worried about, what did you mean?" Blade's smile turned predatory. "Oh, that. Well, the thing is, I'm good with knives. Really good. But I'm even better with people. See, when the Zephyrian fleet gets back to their home system and reports that humans are more dangerous than expected, what do you think is going to happen?" The alien's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "They will update their threat assessments? Maybe. Or maybe they'll decide that humans are dangerous enough to warrant preemptive action. Maybe they'll decide that the best way to deal with a species that's good at violence is to hit them hard and fast before they can organize." The Zephyrian's eyes widened as he began to understand. "But here's the thing," Blade continued. "If they do that, they're going to discover something really interesting about humans. See, we're not just good at individual violence. We're really, really good at organized violence. And we've had a lot of practice." She leaned in closer. "Every human colony has someone like me. Every human ship has a crew that's been trained in basic combat. Every human settlement has weapons, defensive measures, and plans for dealing with exactly this kind of situation. We've been preparing for hostile first contact since before we left Earth, because we know that the universe is full of beings who view soft as vulnerable." The alien was starting to look distinctly uncomfortable. "So if the Zephyrian hegemony decides that humans are too dangerous to leave alone, they're going to find out that we're not just individuals with knives. They're going to find out that we're a species with knives, ships, weapons, tactics, and the kind of strategic coordination that comes from thousands of years of practice at organized violence." She straightened up and smiled pleasantly. "Which is why I really, really hope they decide to update their threat assessments instead. Because I like my knives, but I'd much rather use them for utility work than for the kind of demonstration that involves entire fleets." The Zephyrian diplomat excused himself shortly after that, and Blade noticed that he spent the rest of the evening in intense conversation with his superiors via subspace communication. 3 days later, humanity received a formal communication from the Zephyrian hegemony. It was longer than their first message, more detailed, and carried the signatures of not just the High Command, but the entire Zephyrian Senate. The key passage read, "Upon extensive review and consideration, the Zephyrian hegemony has determined that the human species represents a unique and valuable contribution to galactic civilization. We hereby formally propose the establishment of mutual defense and cooperation treaties, with particular emphasis on cultural exchange and shared security initiatives. We believe that humans' demonstrated competence in conflict resolution and their innovative approaches to personal and collective defense could provide significant benefits to all parties involved." The message concluded with a request for formal diplomatic relations and an invitation for human representatives to address the Zephyrian Senate on applied conflict prevention strategies. When the message was read at the colony meeting, Director Walsh turned to Blade with a bemused expression. "So, let me get this straight. You scared them so badly with a knife demonstration that they want to be our allies?" Blade shrugged. "Sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to make it very clear that you'd be really, really good at it. And this is how diplomatic relations usually work? In my experience? Pretty much. The key is to be friendly, polite, and absolutely terrifying if crossed. It's a delicate balance, but once you get the hang of it, people tend to be a lot more reasonable." 6 months later, the first joint human-Zephyrian military exercise was conducted in the Kepler 442 system. The scenario involved a simulated pirate attack on a mixed convoy, and the human participants were specifically requested to demonstrate their personal weapon integration protocols. The Zephyrian observers were particularly impressed by the efficiency with which human personnel could transition from diplomatic negotiation to combat readiness. They were even more impressed by the casual competence with which every human participant handled their personal weapons, and the seamless way those individual capabilities integrated into larger tactical frameworks. The exercise concluded with a demonstration of human boarding action procedures, which involved Blade and a team of colonial marines storming a mock pirate vessel with nothing but knives, sidearms, and the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that made the Zephyrian observers simultaneously impressed and deeply grateful that humans were on their side. "Fascinating," commented the Zephyrian military attaché as he watched the human team clear the mock ship with textbook precision. "Your species approaches violence with the same methodical precision that ours applies to engineering." "Violence is engineering," Blade replied, wiping down her combat knife before sliding it back into its sheath. "It's the application of force and motion to achieve specific objectives. The only difference is that the tolerances are tighter and the margin for error is 0. And the knives? The knives are just the tools. The real weapon is the training, the mindset, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat." She looked out at the Zephyrian fleet, where ships that had once been poised to conquer human space were now flying in formation with human vessels. Plus, they're really useful for opening packages. The Zephyrian's mandibles clicked in laughter, and Blade reflected that Tuesday mornings had gotten a lot more interesting since first contact. But then again, she'd always been fond of interesting Tuesdays. After all, boring Tuesdays didn't give you the chance to introduce aliens to the finer points of human knife work. And where would be the fun in that? If you enjoyed this story and want more cinematic sci-fi like this, support the channel. Click the link in my bio to help me keep these stories alive.